The most dangerous mistake you can make is laughing at someone while they are still becoming who they were meant to be. The laughter began before Claire Bennett even reached the center of the rooftop terrace. Warm summer air drifted above downtown Chicago. Strings of golden lights hung between steel beams. A jazz trio played softly near the glass railing overlooking miles of city lights. Champagne glasses clinked. Conversations blended together in the polished rhythm of people celebrating success. Claire adjusted the sleeve of her navy dress and forced herself to keep walking. She had almost declined the invitation. Almost. But after 3 years of marriage, 6 months of separation, and 1 finalized divorce, she believed she owed herself the dignity of showing up. She thought she was prepared. She was wrong. Daniel Bennett stood near the center of the crowd, one hand wrapped around a crystal glass, the other resting comfortably on the waist of a younger woman with bright blonde hair and a flawless smile. The engagement ring on her finger flashed each time she moved. Claire noticed it immediately, not because she cared anymore. At least that was what she had been telling herself. Around them stood former co-workers, old friends, industry contacts, and people who once sat at her dining room table sharing holiday dinners. Faces she recognized. Faces that now seemed strangely distant. Daniel spotted her first. His smile widened. Not warmly. Not kindly. The way someone smiles when an opportunity unexpectedly appears. "Claire," he called across the terrace. Several heads turned. Conversation slowed. "You actually came." She stopped a few feet away. "You invited me." "I did." Daniel raised his glass slightly. "I honestly didn't think you would." The blonde woman beside him offered a polite smile. Claire returned it. The woman was not the problem. Daniel always had been. For a moment, silence hovered between them. The city glowed beyond the glass. A train moved through the darkness below like a ribbon of light. Claire could have left right then. Maybe she should have. Then Daniel laughed softly and shook his head. "You know, I was just telling everyone how brave you are." Several people exchanged curious looks. Claire said nothing. "Starting over at 35? Daniel continued. "That takes confidence." A few awkward chuckles followed. Or denial. More laughter. Claire felt every eye on her. Daniel took a sip of champagne. "But honestly, I admire the optimism. Most people would be terrified." Someone near the bar looked away. Someone else suddenly became very interested in their phone. Nobody stepped in. Nobody ever does. Daniel shrugged dramatically. Then again, Claire was never great with business. The words landed lightly, almost casually, which somehow made them worse. "Without me," he added, "she probably wouldn't survive 6 months in the corporate world." The laughter came louder this time. Claire heard it. Every single voice. Yet her expression never changed. She simply looked at him. Really looked at him. The expensive watch. The tailored suit. The confidence that came from believing the story was already over. Daniel mistook her silence for weakness. Most people did. He smiled again. "Don't take it personally." Claire glanced toward the skyline. Thousands of lights stretched across the horizon. Beautiful from a distance. Pulled up close. Then she looked back at him and gave a small nod. Nothing angry. Nothing dramatic. Just a nod. Daniel seemed disappointed by the lack of reaction. The crowd gradually returned to their conversations. Music resumed. Glasses clinked. Life moved forward. Claire set her untouched drink on a nearby table. She turned and walked toward the elevator without another word. Behind her, the laughter continued. Behind her, Daniel believed he had won. He had no idea that years later he would replay this exact moment in his mind again and again. Not because of what Claire said, but because of what she didn't. 3 years later, Daniel Bennett stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling window on the 37th floor of Apex Dynamics headquarters and admired the Chicago skyline as if it belonged to him. Morning sunlight reflected across the glass towers downtown. Ferries moved slowly across the river below. The city looked powerful from up there, and Daniel enjoyed feeling like he was part of something powerful. His reflection stared back at him from the window. Custom suit. Expensive watch. Executive access badge hanging neatly from his jacket pocket. The promotion announcement was only 2 weeks away. Senior Vice President. The title sounded even better in his head than it did on paper. Behind him, the office buzzed with the steady energy of people chasing quarterly targets and annual bonuses. Phones rang. Keyboards clicked. Someone laughed near the conference rooms. Everything felt familiar. Predictable. Safe. Daniel turned away from the glass and walked toward the executive meeting area. As he passed a group of managers, he caught pieces of a conversation. Still buying shares. Nobody knows who it is. Must be a private equity group. Daniel barely paid attention. Corporate rumors appeared every month. Most disappeared just as quickly. By lunchtime, however, the rumors had grown louder. Screens across the finance department displayed market updates. Analysts gathered in small clusters. Conversations lowered whenever senior leadership walked by. Something unusual was happening. During an afternoon strategy meeting, Apex Chief Financial Officer Richard Walsh entered 10 minutes late. That alone caught everyone's attention. Richard never arrived late. He placed a folder on the table and adjusted his glasses. The room became noticeably quieter. "Before we begin," Richard said, "I need everyone to remain focused on business operations." Nobody spoke. There are market developments taking place that the board is monitoring closely. Daniel exchanged a glance with another executive. Market developments. That was corporate language for trouble. Richard continued. At this time, there is no cause for concern. Which, in Daniel's experience, usually meant there was absolutely cause for concern. After the meeting ended, whispers spread through the hallways like electricity. An unidentified investor had acquired another block of Apex shares. Then another. Then another. Nobody knew the buyer's identity. The transactions were legal, carefully structured, and almost impossible to trace. The financial news websites picked up the story before sunset. By the next morning, business reporters had created a nickname. The Phantom Investor. Daniel laughed when he first read it. Sounds like a bad movie title, he said to a coworker. Yet something about the situation lingered in the back of his mind. Over the following weeks, the acquisition continued. Quietly, methodically, almost surgically. Every few days another filing appeared. Another percentage point changed hands. Another article speculated about motives. The board remained silent. Investors grew nervous. Employees became curious. Meanwhile, Daniel stayed focused on his upcoming promotion. He had worked for this moment for years. Nothing was going to distract him. One evening, after most employees had gone home, he remained alone in his office reviewing leadership reports. Outside, the city glowed beneath the darkening sky. His phone vibrated with a news alert. He glanced down. Apex Dynamics stock rises amid acquisition speculation. Daniel opened the article. The final sentence caught his attention. According to sources familiar with the matter, the unidentified investor may soon seek a controlling position within the company. Daniel frowned. For the first time, the rumors no longer felt distant. He looked through the glass walls of his office toward the executive floor. Several lights were still on. People were still working, still worried, still searching for answers. Somewhere out there, someone was quietly changing the future of Apex Dynamics. And nobody seemed to know who. The following Monday, Apex Dynamics opened with another surge in market activity. By 8:30 in the morning, every major business publication seemed to be talking about the same thing. The phantom investor had crossed another ownership threshold. No interviews, no public statements, no appearances, just another filing quietly submitted before dawn. Daniel Bennett stared at the article on his office monitor while sipping coffee that had already gone cold. Outside his glass office, the atmosphere felt different. Not panicked, not yet, but tense. Like the moment before a summer storm when everyone notices the sky changing color, but nobody wants to admit rain is coming. Throughout the day, executives moved in and out of conference rooms carrying folders instead of tablets. Legal teams suddenly appeared on floors where legal teams rarely visited. Even senior managers lowered their voices when discussing strategy. Daniel noticed all of it. He simply refused to worry about it. After all, Apex was a billion-dollar company. Investors bought and sold shares every day. That was how business worked. Yet the board seemed less confident. Late that afternoon, Daniel received an invitation marked mandatory. Executive leadership briefing. 6th floor boardroom. 4 o'clock sharp. When he entered, nearly every senior leader was already seated. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh coffee. Through the windows, clouds rolled across the Chicago skyline. Richard Walsh stood near the screen at the front of the room. He looked tired. The kind of tired that came from too many sleepless nights and not enough answers. "I will keep this brief," Richard began. Nobody interrupted. "We continue to monitor significant share accumulation by a single investor." A slide appeared behind him. Ownership percentages. Dates. Acquisition patterns. The numbers drew immediate attention. Daniel sat forward slightly. Even he could no longer dismiss the scale of what was happening. Whoever this person was, they had spent years building toward this moment. "Can we identify the buyer?" someone asked. Richard shook his head. Not conclusively. Another executive frowned. "Private equity? Possibly. Competitor? Possibly. Foreign investment group? Possibly." Frustration spread across the room. Every answer seemed to lead nowhere. Richard finally folded his hands together. "What concerns the board is not who this investor is." Several heads lifted. "It is how patient they have been." Silence followed. Daniel glanced back at the ownership chart. Richard was right. The acquisition stretched across years. Not months. Years. Tiny positions acquired quietly, methodically, almost invisibly, like someone assembling a puzzle piece by piece while everyone else remained distracted. The meeting ended with more questions than answers. As people filed out, Daniel lingered behind. He stared at the screen one final time before it went dark. Something about the strategy bothered him. This was not the behavior of someone chasing a quick profit. This was personal. Somewhere beyond the walls of Apex Dynamics, someone had been planning for a very long time. That evening, long after sunset, Daniel arrived home to his luxury condominium overlooking Lake Michigan. His fiancée, Madison, sat curled up on the couch scrolling through social media. "You look exhausted," she said. Daniel loosened his tie. "Long day." She smiled. "Still worried about your mystery billionaire?" He laughed. "Not worried." Yet the answer felt less convincing than he intended. Madison returned to her phone. Daniel walked toward the window. Below, city lights reflected across the dark water. His promotion was still coming. His career was still moving upward. Everything should have felt secure. Instead, for reasons he could not explain, he found himself thinking about the investor again. Not because of the money, not because of the shares, but because of the patience. Whoever they were, they had waited years for something. And people willing to wait that long were usually impossible to stop. 6 years earlier, Claire Bennett sat alone at a small kitchen table that barely fit inside her one-bedroom apartment. Rain tapped softly against the window. The digital clock on the microwave read 1:43 a.m. A half-finished cup of coffee sat beside her laptop. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the sound of keys clicking beneath her fingertips. Outside, Chicago slept. Claire did not. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier. The paperwork sat inside a drawer she rarely opened. She had stopped counting the sleepless nights, stopped checking Daniel's social media, stopped wondering whether he regretted anything. Some questions no longer deserved answers. The apartment itself was modest. Second-floor walk-up, thin walls, aging hardwood floors that creaked every time she crossed the room. It was not the life she imagined when she was younger. Yet for the first time in years, every decision inside those walls belonged entirely to her. Claire looked at the presentation glowing on her screen. Marketing analytics, customer behavior models, brand performance forecasting. The kind of work she used to love before she spent years helping build someone else's career while quietly setting aside her own ambitions. She remembered countless evenings reviewing Daniel's presentations, preparing strategy decks, refining proposals, solving problems behind the scenes. Work nobody ever noticed because somebody else always stood at the podium collecting credit. A notification appeared on her screen. New client inquiry. Claire blinked, then opened the message. A regional retail company wanted a consultation. Small project, small budget, nothing impressive. Yet she smiled anyway, because it was hers. The next morning she met the client at a neighborhood coffee shop. She arrived 15 minutes early, wore her only professional blazer, ordered the cheapest drink on the menu. The meeting lasted 43 minutes. When it ended, the client shook her hand and signed a contract worth less than $2,000. Claire walked back to her apartment carrying the paperwork like it was worth millions. In some ways, it was. That contract paid her electric bill. It paid her internet bill. More importantly, it proved something Daniel never believed. She could build something on her own. Weeks became months. Months became years. The kitchen table became a small office. The small office became a larger office. Employees arrived one by one. A designer, a data analyst, a project manager, then another, then another. Claire hired carefully, promoted slowly. She learned every lesson the difficult way. There were contracts she lost, deals that collapsed, investors who said no, Some nights, she drove home after midnight wondering whether she was making a terrible mistake. Yet every morning she returned. Every setback taught her something useful. Every challenge made her stronger. Eventually, her company launched a proprietary marketing intelligence platform that helped businesses predict customer trends more accurately. The technology spread quickly. Clients grew. Revenue climbed. Industry publications began mentioning her company. Then larger companies started calling. Then investors. Then acquisition offers. Most founders would have sold immediately. Claire listened politely and declined every one of them. Because she was no longer building a company to prove somebody wrong. She was building a life that finally felt like her own. Years later, when one of those offers eventually arrived with more zeros than she had ever imagined possible, she accepted. Not with celebration. Not with tears. Just a quiet signature on a quiet afternoon. And somewhere across the city, without realizing it, Daniel Bennett had just become an employee inside a future Claire was still carefully designing. The first sign that something was changing came on a Thursday morning. Apex Dynamics stock opened nearly 4% higher before most employees had finished their first cup of coffee. By 10 o'clock, financial news channels were discussing the company every half hour. Analysts debated acquisition scenarios. Investors speculated about leadership changes. Nobody had concrete answers. Yet everyone sensed the same thing. The clock was ticking. Daniel Bennett stood inside another executive briefing while a presentation filled the screen behind the chief financial officer. Charts climbed upward. Ownership percentages increased again. The phantom investor had crossed another major threshold. This time the room reacted differently. Nobody looked surprised anymore. They looked worried. Daniel watched several board members exchange quiet glances. One director rubbed his forehead throughout the entire presentation. Another spent most of the meeting staring out the window. Experienced people recognized patterns. And this pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Someone was not simply investing in Apex. Someone was positioning themselves to control it. Later that afternoon, Daniel joined Madison for lunch at a restaurant overlooking the Chicago River. Boats moved slowly beneath the bridges. Tourists crowded the sidewalks. The city appeared completely normal. Daniel wished business felt the same way. "You are thinking about work again," Madison said. He smiled weakly. "That obvious?" "Very." She set down her glass. "Is the investor situation really that serious?" Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Nobody knows." "That sounds serious." He laughed quietly. "Exactly." Madison studied him for a moment. "At least your promotion is still happening." Daniel nodded. That part remained true. Human Resources had already begun preparing executive transition documents. Senior Vice President. Bigger office. Larger compensation package. More authority. Everything he had worked toward. Yet somehow the accomplishment felt less exciting than it had a few months earlier. By the following week, another surprise arrived. An emergency board meeting appeared on executive calendars. Mandatory attendance. No explanation provided. Rumors spread through every department. Some employees predicted restructuring. Others feared layoffs. A few believed the company was about to be sold entirely. Nobody knew what to believe. Meanwhile, across the city, Claire Bennett sat in a quiet conference room 30 floors above Michigan Avenue. Morning sunlight spilled across polished oak tables. A legal team reviewed documents one final time. Advisors discussed numbers large enough to change multiple industries. Claire listened carefully, asked questions, took notes, the same way she had approached every important decision throughout her career. There was no celebration, no dramatic speeches, just preparation. One attorney slid a folder across the table. "Once this is executed," he said, "there is no going back." Claire glanced at the documents. Years of planning rested inside those pages. Years of patience. Years of discipline. She signed her name with calm precision. The attorney smiled. "Congratulations." Claire simply nodded. Through the windows, Chicago stretched for miles beneath a clear blue sky. Somewhere inside that city, Daniel Bennett was preparing for the biggest promotion of his career. He believed he was approaching the peak of the mountain. He did not realize the landscape itself was about to change. Back at Apex headquarters, employees received another company-wide email shortly before closing time. Mandatory all-hands meeting. Friday, 9 o'clock sharp. Attendance required. No exceptions. The message was brief, professional, completely ordinary. Yet within minutes, speculation flooded every hallway. People sensed history approaching. They just did not know whose history it was. Friday arrived beneath a gray Chicago sky. Low clouds drifted above the city, turning the glass towers silver. By 8:30 in the morning, employees were already gathering inside Apex Dynamics headquarters. Elevators opened and closed continuously. Coffee cups filled conference tables. Conversations moved in nervous whispers. Nobody wanted to admit they were anxious, but the tension hung in the air anyway. Daniel Bennett stepped off the executive elevator wearing the confidence he had spent years building. Today was supposed to be important. His promotion paperwork had been finalized. His name appeared on organizational charts that had not yet been released publicly. Senior Vice President. The title felt real now. Tangible. Earned. Several colleagues congratulated him as he walked toward the main auditorium. He accepted their handshakes with practiced ease. Big day, one manager said. Daniel smiled. Looks like it. Yet even he could feel something unusual beneath the surface. Too many executives appeared distracted. Too many board members had arrived in person. Even the chief executive officer seemed unusually serious. At precisely 9 o'clock, nearly 600 employees filled the auditorium. The room stretched across an entire floor of the building. Rows of seats faced a stage illuminated by soft white lights. A massive screen displayed the company logo. Conversations gradually faded as senior leadership took their seats. Daniel sat near the front with other executives. The chief executive officer stepped to the podium. His smile looked professional but restrained. Thank you all for being here. The room fell silent. As many of you know, Apex Dynamics has experienced significant shareholder activity over the past several years. Nobody moved. Today, we can finally provide clarity. A slide appeared on the screen behind him. Ownership percentages. Acquisition timelines. Familiar numbers. Yet this time, there was no speculation attached. This time the information felt final. The chief executive officer continued. After extensive discussions with the board and our major shareholders, an agreement has been reached regarding the future ownership of Apex Dynamics. Daniel felt his pulse increase slightly. Around him, dozens of employees leaned forward. The room seemed to shrink. Effective immediately, the chief executive officer said, a controlling ownership position has officially been transferred. The screen changed again. One simple sentence appeared. Majority ownership confirmed. A ripple moved through the audience. Questions formed instantly. The chief executive officer paused, then smiled for the first time all morning. I believe it is best if our new owner introduces herself personally. Herself. The single word landed differently. Daniel noticed it immediately. So did everyone else. A woman. The phantom investor was a woman. Murmurs spread across the auditorium. The chief executive officer stepped aside. The stage remained empty. 1 second passed. Then another. Then the side entrance opened quietly. A figure appeared beneath the soft stage lights. Daniel glanced toward the entrance without much thought. At first, he only noticed the navy business suit. Then the calm posture. Then the familiar way she carried herself. His expression froze. The auditorium disappeared. The conversations disappeared. Even the sounds seemed to disappear. For one impossible moment, his mind refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. Because the woman walking calmly toward center stage was not a stranger. She was not a billionaire he had read about in financial magazines. She was not a celebrity investor or a famous entrepreneur. She was Claire Bennett, his ex-wife. The same woman he had once watched leave a rooftop terrace without saying a word. The same woman he had dismissed years ago. Claire reached the podium and looked across hundreds of faces. Her expression remained composed, professional, unshaken. Then her eyes briefly met Daniel's. Only for a second. Long enough for him to realize something that instantly changed everything. She had known exactly where this road would lead long before anyone else did. The silence lasted longer than anyone expected. Hundreds of employees sat motionless as Claire Bennett stood behind the podium. The massive screen behind her displayed a simple introduction. Claire Bennett, majority shareholder, new owner. The words remained visible for everyone in the room. Daniel Bennett stared at them as if they belonged to someone else. His mind kept searching for an explanation that did not exist. Around him, people exchanged confused glances. Some employees recognized her name immediately. Others were opening company directories on their phones. A few members of senior leadership already understood exactly what had happened, and their expressions revealed it. Claire adjusted the microphone slightly. Nothing about her movements seemed rushed. She looked calm, comfortable, as though she had stood on stages like this many times before. "Good morning, everyone," she said. Her voice carried clearly across the auditorium. Professional, steady, familiar. Daniel had heard that voice thousands of times. Across dinner tables, during road trips, in the kitchen of their first apartment. Yet somehow it sounded different now. Not because she had changed, because he had never truly listened before. Claire thanked employees for their work. She spoke about innovation, growth, and long-term strategy. She discussed market opportunities and future investments. She mentioned teams, customers, and company culture. What surprised everyone was what she did not discuss. She never mentioned the acquisition battle, never mentioned the years of stock purchases, never mentioned becoming the mysterious investor everyone had been chasing. Most importantly, she never mentioned Daniel. Not once. The omission felt deliberate, powerful. Daniel sat frozen in his chair. He remembered the rooftop terrace, the laughter, the champagne glass in his hand, the confidence he once carried so easily. Suddenly those memories felt very far away. Claire continued her presentation. New initiatives appeared on the screen behind her. Expansion plans, technology investments, employee development programs. The audience gradually relaxed. People began taking notes. Questions shifted away from curiosity and toward business. Claire was not there to celebrate a victory. She was there to lead. And somehow that realization made the situation even harder for Daniel to process. She was not acting like someone seeking revenge. She was acting like someone who had already moved beyond it years ago. After 40 minutes, the presentation ended. The auditorium erupted into applause. Not forced applause, genuine applause. Employees stood. Executives stood. Board members stood. Claire acknowledged them with a polite smile. Then she stepped away from the podium. As people began leaving their seats, conversations exploded throughout the room. Daniel remained where he was. Madison had sent 3 text messages during the presentation. He had not answered any of them. Several colleagues approached him. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked curious. One executive finally leaned closer. "You knew her?" Daniel swallowed. "A long time ago." The executive glanced toward the stage where Claire was speaking with board members. "Well," he said carefully, "she seems impressive." Daniel could only nod. Across the room, Claire laughed softly at something a board member said. The sound barely reached him through the crowd, yet it felt strangely familiar. Familiar and distant at the same time. For years, Daniel had believed success belonged to people like him. People who stood in front of rooms. People who received recognition. People who looked powerful. Now he was watching the woman he once underestimated command the attention of an entire company without raising her voice. And for the first time, he began to understand the difference between being noticed and being respected. By late afternoon, the excitement inside Apex Dynamics had evolved into something else entirely. Curiosity had become disbelief. Disbelief had become conversation. And conversation had become a single question repeated across every floor of the building. How had Claire Bennett done it? Employees gathered around coffee stations discussing articles they had found online. Financial analysts circulated reports. Senior managers reviewed acquisition documents that revealed only fragments of the story. Every new detail seemed to create even more questions. Daniel Bennett spent most of the day inside meetings he barely remembered. People spoke. Slides appeared. Budgets were discussed. Yet his attention kept drifting elsewhere. Every few minutes, he found himself replaying the same image. Claire standing beneath the stage lights. Calm, confident, entirely certain of where she belonged. Shortly after 4 o'clock, Daniel received a message from executive administration. New ownership transition briefing. Attendance requested. The conference room overlooked Lake Michigan. Gray waves rolled beneath a cloudy sky. Around the table sat senior leaders from multiple divisions. Claire entered a few minutes later accompanied by legal advisors and board members. The room stood almost automatically. Not because anyone was instructed to. Because respect often revealed itself in small, unconscious actions. Claire thanked everyone for attending and began discussing future plans. She spoke about expanding research initiatives, investing in technology infrastructure, creating leadership development programs for younger employees. The conversation remained practical, forward-looking, focused entirely on the future. Daniel listened carefully. What struck him most was not what she said. It was what she never mentioned. There was no bitterness in her voice, no score being settled, no attempt to embarrass anyone. She was not interested in revisiting old wounds. She was busy building new opportunities. At one point, a board member asked how long she had been accumulating shares. Several people looked up immediately. Claire smiled faintly. Long enough to understand the company before trying to lead it. A few people laughed softly. Daniel did not, because he suddenly realized something important. The acquisition had not been an emotional reaction. It had been a strategic decision. Years of planning, years of patience, years of preparation. While he had been focused on promotions and titles, Claire had been quietly constructing something much larger. After the meeting ended, employees slowly filtered back to their offices. The building felt different now. Optimistic, energized. People believed in her. Not because she owned the company, because she had earned their confidence within a single day. Daniel remained seated after everyone else left. Through the conference room glass, he watched Claire speaking with department heads in the hallway. Every conversation looked effortless. Every interaction genuine. She listened more than she spoke. Asked questions. Took notes. The same qualities he once overlooked now seemed impossible to miss. As evening settled across Chicago, Daniel finally returned to his office. The city lights were beginning to appear beyond the windows. His reflection stared back at him again. Same suit, same office, same position. Yet nothing felt the same. On his desk sat the folder containing his promotion documents. Just days earlier it had represented success. Now it felt strangely small. Not because the promotion no longer mattered. Because he had spent years measuring achievement by titles while Claire had been measuring it by growth. And growth, he was beginning to understand, was far more difficult to see until someone had already traveled farther than anyone imagined. 3 weeks later, the excitement surrounding the ownership transition had settled into a new reality. Employees adapted. Meetings continued. Projects moved forward. The company kept growing. And Claire Bennett kept showing up every morning with the same quiet discipline that had carried her through every stage of her journey. One evening, long after most employees had gone home, the executive floor sat nearly empty. The city shimmered beyond the glass walls. Thousands of lights stretched across Chicago like stars scattered across the ground. Claire stood near the window in her office reviewing quarterly projections when a soft knock interrupted the silence. "Come in," she said. The door opened. Daniel Bennett stepped inside. For a moment, neither spoke. The years between them seemed to fill the room. Claire set her tablet aside. Her expression remained calm. "Daniel." He nodded. "Claire." The conversation he had imagined 100 times suddenly felt impossible to begin. He had prepared explanations, apologies, questions. Standing there now, none of them sounded right. Claire waited patiently. Finally, Daniel exhaled. "I wanted to congratulate you." She smiled politely. "Thank you." Another silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Daniel glanced toward the skyline. "I still cannot believe all of this." Claire looked out the window as well. "Neither could I sometimes." He laughed softly. "That is probably the difference." She turned toward him. "What do you mean?" Daniel shook his head. "I spent years believing success happened all at once. A promotion, a title, a big opportunity." His eyes drifted toward the city lights. "You built yours one day at a time." Claire considered that. Most things worth having happened that way. Daniel nodded slowly. He thought about the rooftop terrace years earlier. The laughter, the assumptions, the certainty he carried back then. For the first time, he understood how little he had actually known. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. Claire did not interrupt. For a lot of things. The words hung between them. He expected anger, maybe resentment. Instead, Claire simply listened. "I underestimated you," he continued. "I thought I understood your limits. I thought I understood what you were capable of." He looked down briefly before meeting her eyes again. "I was wrong." Claire remained silent for a moment. Then she smiled. Not triumphantly, not bitterly, just peacefully. "I know." Daniel actually laughed at that. A genuine laugh. The first one all evening. "You know, part of me thought you bought this company because of me." Claire looked surprised, then amused. "Daniel." She shook her head gently. "You were never that important." The words should have hurt. Instead, they felt strangely liberating. Because he knew she was telling the truth. She had not spent years planning revenge. She had spent years building a life. He simply happened to be standing inside it now. Claire picked up her tablet and glanced at the clock. Another meeting waited in 10 minutes. Another project. Another decision. Another step forward. Life continued. Daniel understood that too. He extended his hand. Congratulations, Claire. She shook it. Firm. Professional. Final. Thank you, Daniel. He walked toward the door. Before leaving, he paused and looked back one last time. Claire had already returned to work, reviewing reports, making notes, focused on the future rather than the past. Daniel smiled to himself and quietly left the office. Outside, the city lights reflected against the glass towers. Somewhere below, millions of people were still chasing success, still searching for validation, still trying to prove something to someone. But Claire Bennett had discovered something better. She did not win because she became wealthy. She did not win because she owned the company. She did not win because her former husband finally understood her value. She won because she stopped needing him to. And as the lights of Chicago glowed beneath the night sky, the truth became beautifully simple. She never bought back his respect. She built a life so full that she no longer needed it.